A very good afternoon to all of you. The break was a well-deserved one. Let's proceed with the afternoon session and let's proceed with Mr. Alexander Medin, our next speaker, in fact. Mr. Alexander Medin, Director of Northern Yoga Retreat Center and Back in the Ring, Norway, although born and brought up in Norway, is better known as an Ashtanga yoga instructor. He has been teaching yoga around the world for over 20 years. He has pursued many talents and in fact has a versatile background in sports and has also worked 6 years as a professional dancer. As described in his own words, his yogic journey was not an easy one, but battling against all odds. In 2002, he went on to be certified as an Ashtanga teacher by none other than Sri K. Patabi Joyce from Mysore, India. It was Sri Patabi Joyce who developed the style of Vinyasa Yoga, which is known as Ashtanga. In total, there are only 35 people worldwide who have obtained the certification as Ashtanga teachers by Patabi Joyce, and Mr. Alexander is one of them. In the year 2004, Mr. Alexander Medin completed his MA in Indian religions and Sanskrit, and has in fact spent many years studying in India. Mr. Alexander Medin has also translated the Yoga Sutras and the Bhagavad Gita from Sanskrit to Norwegian. He regularly writes about yoga, and many of his articles based on yoga have been published in leading international journals. He is a keen practitioner of karma yoga and sees yoga as a tool to improve people's life. In 2015, Mr. Alexander took over what was then known as Northern Feldstua and also started to transform it into Northern Yoga Mountain Lodge. The building was at the time in ruins. Today, the lodge can host up to 100 guests and combines a distinct mountain feel and Norwegian touch with a yogic style and value set. Mr. Alexander Medin is also the co-founder and co-owner of Puro Yoga in Oslo, as well as the founder of the foundation Yoga for Life. The foundation has launched and continues running projects such as Gangster Yoga and Back in the Ring, helping people who have fallen out of society, giving them the opportunity to build themselves up again through a solid yoga practice, heightened sense of responsibility and social work. It is such a privilege to welcome you, sir. I also request Dr. Vigneshwar Bhatt to moderate this session. Thank you.
So I welcome Mr. Alexander Medin to this session, and I know him from maybe 10 years. More than teacher, he is the great practitioner, and he is guiding a lot of youths in the path of yoga and in the path of spirituality. So after having a lot of knowledge and experience, he is down to earth, and we have done different projects together. That experience, by that experience, I can say that he is more than teacher, means he is a great practitioner and he is great guide for the youths. So now we have Alexander Medin to take the session. I request Mr. Alexander to take the session.
I request the resource person to unmute. and turn on the video.
Can you hear us? Can you hear us? Okay, okay. So or else you can do one thing. We can't hear you. Once you can leave the meeting and again you can join.
Sir, I will share my screen. I will just share my screen, sir. You can see from this. I will show you where you can unmute. So here.
Yes, I am aware of that. But for some reason.
Yeah, now you are audible, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, good. Okay, a warm welcome to you all. And I must say, thank you very much for that warm introduction, Vigneshwara, and the rest of you. For me, it is this little talk, it kind of stirred up a lot of fear in me, because I feel that amongst all the dignitaries in this conference, I don't really feel I live up to the standards that you have. But nonetheless, I spent more than 10 years studying Sanskrit. I have the privilege to meet Vigneshwara, spend time with him at the Pathashala. I've done projects with him in India. He had come and visited me in Norway. And we share the same interest in yoga and, of course, the diversity of the ancient practices of the Vedas. In this little talk, I would like to share some light on you, on basically the reference to yoga in the later Vedic period. We can certainly see yogic wisdom early in the Vedas, but there are no references to the word to the word yoga in the Samhitas, and of course the word yoga is something that occurs later in the Taittiriya Katha Upanishad and Shvetashvatara Upanishad, and that will be the main focus of my talk today. But before I describe yoga, how it is being portrayed there, I would like to give you a little overview of the kind of development of yoga as we know in modern Western academia. And the first references to yoga that we have is, of course, with the name the yukta, a person who is joined and a person who is connected. And we have references to the word keishin, and yet the reference to yoga and Upanishads say very little about the actual teachings. We are left with myths and a few archaeological excavations that kind of allures to the practice of yoga. The first actual reference to the practice of yoga that we can know for certain is from the Buddhist account, the Majjhima Nikaya, where it is referred to Buddha practicing with yoga ascetics, where he kind of tormented his body with trying to meditate, with holding the breath for too long, causing headaches and kind of starving himself. And so we can know for certain that at the time of the Buddha, 500 years prior to Christ, there was yogis and ascetic practices, but the actual method and the distinct formal practices we know very little about. What is, of course, interesting when it comes to the Vedas is this kind of association with this mystical Agni, the fire of transformation that is the mediator between the gods and heavens. Now, I would argue that this fire is, of course, later internalized as Savitri, and the kind of Nitya karmas, which is the duties of all twice born, is a kind of internalization of this ritual to kind of bring about light and luminosity within man. And we see also later that, the sun is venerated as the illuminator and the giver of wisdom and strength. We see it in the Aditya Hridayam. We see it later in the modern practices of sun salutation. There is something about this unexplainable essence of the luminosity, the brilliance of the sun that is being integrated into the Vedic practice. Modern scholarship, of course, is very clear about that yoga begun among ascetics in northern India. And it's, of course, this sincere tapas that they were doing, as standing on one leg, raising one arm, sitting in front of 5 fires, etc. Where they originated from, we don't really know, but we see there is a kind of focus on tapasya and the practice of tapas to refine the body. And later in the Upanishad, when we meet the kind of concept of karma and moksha, we see that kind of tapas is a crucial ingredient to kind of gain this inner realization. But we can also assume that although the early, you could say, audience or Vedic practitioners, although there's no reference to yoga practice per se, we know that there are references to the importance of controlling the mind, centering the mind, and finding focus within the mind in order to execute the rituals and simply to kind of deliver the various duties and responsibilities associated with the sacrifice. But later, in the kind of brahmanas, there are some reference to the kind of panchavayus, but there are no references to pranayama practice per se. However, in the Atharva Veda, which is different to the main Samhitas, a book of spell, a book of sorcery, a book of magic. We find, of course, the famous reference to yogis in Ganapati Atharva Shirsa, Tvam Yogino Dhyayanti Nityam, where Ganapati is kind of visualized and embodied as a kind of focal point for the yogis. Apart from that, we know, and of course there is reference to the Vratyas that somehow lived on the fringes of Vedic society and did not practice the kind of standard rituals and rites of the Vedas, but seemed to have more engaged in the practice of a pranayama, or at least there's reference to them controlling the breath. There's references in the Atharva Veda to, you know, the various sub factors of the breath. But as far as textual sources in the Veda, it's very scarce about the actual practice of yoga. This is in the later Upanishads, such as Kartayan Upanishad, which I will refer to later. But other references to yoga we see, of course, in the Indus Valley civilization, with the excavation of the Harappan seal, the figure some believe to be Rudra or Pashupati, seated in a kind of yogic posture called Mula Bandhasana, with the heel turns forward, the knees to the side, and kind of surrounded by animals. We may assume that this is, of course, a person associated with some extraordinary strength and internal control, and later references to the texture we have about Rudra and later Shiva, somebody who perhaps lived on the fringes of Vedic society. But and of course we have also the figures of terracotta-like, goddess-like figures that somebody believed that it has been a kind of ancient practice of goddess worship. Now, the final text, we have references to these early tapasvins or ascetics, is on the Greek accounts from historians that kind of tell an account of how Alexander the Great, in his attempts to conquer northwest India, kind of see different men standing or laying naked in these kind of various postures, and seem to have had some extraordinary strength or merit that mesmerized him. But the actual practice of what they did in the early Vedas, it's impossible to say from textual sources and also the historical evidence that we have. The problem is, of course, when it comes to yoga, that there is no proper origin prior to Patanjali. We don't know. There is, of course, the famous saying, Hiranya Garbo Yogasyananyan Vaktananya Puratanaha, but it doesn't make sense that for modern scholarship to believe that something came out of nothing. And the problem of modern scholarship also when it comes to the Vedas is that a lot of them have great difficulty with the apaurushaya concept. How can something be eternal when there is a kind of linear approach that people are used to? So you kind of either, but the problem of man, the inmost principle of man, is of course the same in this day or ancient day. And what is that very kind of essence of man, and how do we know that in an essence of man is what is the whole theme and what is being articulated in the Upanishads. And I would argue that many of the principal Upanishad, they embody elements of yoga within it. Although, of course, each shaka had Upanishad associated with it, so we may assume that it was the final mystical teaching that one learned after years and years practice when one was mature to finally perceive it. But I would like to just focus now on the kind of how kind of yoga is portrayed in the Upanishad per se. The earliest Upanishads, of course, Brihadaranyaka and Chandogya Upanishad, there is no direct references to the word yoga, but they are certainly the very foundation of all later Upanishads. And we find the first reference to moksha in Brihadaranyaka 3.1 and 3.6, and of course to dharma, and of course this transmigration of life that later is so essential to Hinduism. And in the Taittiriya Upanishad is where we find the first reference to the word yoga. And here it is referred to as yoga atma, when Mahapucham Pratishta, where it is kind of associated to be that inmost connection to Vignaya, that kind of the centering point among the 5 koshas, where the body is explained kind of in the similarity to a Russian doll, in like layers of an onion that you gradually peel in order to come through a inner essence of clarity. And from this, we may assume that meditative or yogic practices were in use in Vedic times. However, it's very difficult to determine whether it was part of the Aryan tradition or if it was influenced from the kind of non-Vedic sources that a lot of modern scholars argue that it was part of a different ascetic tradition. But it is interesting to see that in the final part of the Taittiriya Upanishad, when we have reference to the yoga and kshema together when it comes to manushi samagnaha, the kind of inner kind of qualities of man. And here we kind of, yoga is that very centering element that kind of give clarity, that is always there, that is that connecting point, the focal point in all one's kind of activities and the foundation for our activity within us, or the centering element, I would say, in activity within us. Now, if we come to the Katha Upanishad, it is probably the most ancient Upanishad with kind of reference to the yoga. And of course, some modern scholars argue that the later 3 chapters is later, but here in the Katha Upanishad, we kind of have the similarity to classical yoga as portrayed by Patanjali, like his definition, yoga chitta vritti nirodha. Here we have the famous kind of verse in the 6th chapter where tam yogam iti manyante stiram indriya dharanam apramatta tada bhavati yogo hi prabhava pyayau. So, you know, when the senses are firmly reined in, that is yoga, people think. And then a man is free from his distraction, because yoga is the coming into being as well as ceasing of disturbing element. I'm sorry, I have some kids here in the background. I just need to make him be quiet. 1 second. I'm sorry, I'm in my home and there's 3 kids here kind of causing some noise in the background. So I hope this is not disturbing to you all.
No problem.
But okay, the Katha Upanishad is kind of part of the Kataka school of the Krishna Yajurveda, and it's divided into 6 chapters. And there's much to say about that, but I would just like to highlight the kind of how yoga is being portrayed here, and kind of the story of Nachiketa and Yama, where Nachiketa is kind of granted 3 bones from Yama due to that he waited for him a long time. But the first is he wants to regain access to his father again. The second, he wants to know about the kind of meaning of the fire sacrifice. And the third one that kind of Yama is very hesitant to answer is whether a man, after death, does he continue to live or not? And most of this Upanishad is, of course, elaborations of this inner essence of man. And is it eternal? And how to gain this kind of vidya? And what is it that sets man free from transmigration? And of course, as we shall see later, it's this kind of reining in of the senses. The mind in itself is the kind of liberator and the cause of bondage. And thus, how we see and work and understand the mind is the kind of crucial development for understanding yoga, and here ultimately then transcending death. And of course, here is this famous passage, which speaks about, Anya, who speaks about Shreya and Preyas. And I will read the translation in English to you to make it more understandable for the since it would take too much time if I have to translate them from Sanskrit to the English reader. So he speaks about the good is one thing, and the gratifying is quite another. The goals are different, and both bind a man. Yet good things await the one who chooses the good. And by choosing the gratifying, that would satisfy the senses, one misses the goal. And the point here is then, of course, to help man transcend the inclination to just follow the senses and to seek gratification for I, me, and myself, and rather develop a kind of balanced mind, composed mind, and a centered mind that is fit to kind of see through the delusional existence and find the clarity of kind of real existence. And the goal of Yoga and Vedanta is that inmost essence of man that does not change. And it's of course the same in yoga, although yoga is kind of dualistic approach. And in this Upanishad, we kind of see that how, we hear of scholars thinking themselves to be wise, but yet and intelligent, but yet they are wallowing in ignorance like fool, and like blind man leading them the blind due to lack of that inner knowledge. And thus this inner wisdom of the self, it lies hidden from the person caught up in transmigration, and they fall into the power of death again and again. And then later, kind of in the 13th chapter, we hear about the Adhyatma yoga, the kind of higher yoga. And of course, all yogic references in particularly Upanishad and Aranyakas, when it comes to Nididhyasana, it has to do with internalizing the rituals. It has to do with internalizing that magical vision of this Antaragni and finding a true sense of light, which is different to the kind of normal application and of the senses. So this essence remains hidden for normal people because we are caught up in the fluctuation of the senses. We are caught up in this gratification of seeking illusionary enjoyment that bind us and make us suffer and then eventually die. So here, the kind of yoga that is being addressed is kind of first and foremost a way to comprehend, contemplate, and experience something that is more real than these fleeting senses, that is more stable, and that kind of is the very anchor of consciousness, of reasoning. Yet it is impossible to define as a particular object, and it is rather the kind of the inmost subjective experience of our being that holds and sustains the many fragments of our mind into a unified whole. And this unifying principles which is needed to center the mind, is later articulated in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali as the very foundation of yama, that regulate destructive patterns within yourself if you want to explain and to understand this inner essence of being. And this inner essence is, articulated in various ways, but it's impossible to explain it, to catch it in word, in form, in concept. However, when a person comes to know it, when he experiences it, the text says, he will rejoice in that realm and come to know it's real. So thus, it's the kind of, the mind and senses is the kind of tool to understand this inner essence of self, yet it is never found within the mind and senses itself. Because, as they say, it would, as we also find reference to in the, Namriyate, that it is never born, it is never died, it has not come from anywhere, he has not come, he's unborn and eternal and primeval and everlasting, and is not killed when the body is killed. And this verb is, of course, almost verbatim to Bhagavad Gita 2:20, apart from a few words in the beginning. But since this inner essence of man is impossible to grasp through the senses, and is said to be, finer than the finest, larger than the largest, this kind of famous passage, that it lies there hidden in the heart of all beings. But it's when we regulate our desires and become free from sorrow and pain, confusion and delusion, a person may come to experience that through that inherent power, grace. And it's that luminous principle of that which kind of give rise to consciousness, to understanding, to meditation and absorption in the self. Yet the irony is, of course, it's equally accessible to all, the good, the bad, the rich, the poor, the learned, and the fool. It makes no difference between caste, creed, gender, status, stature, etc. But it says it's more beneficial to seek out to regulate yourself, develop good actions, develop a balanced, centered mind, if you want to perceive it and understand it, because otherwise you get sidetracked by the numerous fluctuations in the mind, which cause bondage and suffering. So they are very clear to say that, if you want to perceive this, quit your evil ways, or your ignorant ways, or your destructive ways. Because the text is very clear that the mind needs to be calm and composed, and if the mind is not tranquil, it is not possible to see it. And what is peculiar about this text, that here we find the first definition of yoga similar to the one given by Patanjali. And later, as I mentioned earlier in introduction in the 6th chapter, we find reference to also the nerve patterns in the body, where one leading to the center of the brain awakens this immortal state. And this later topic, where the purification of the physical body is considered the gateway to attain higher states of consciousness within mind, is also the main topic of later Hatha Yoga. And of course, here in the Katha Upanishad, we have the reference to the self as a rider in a chariot, and the body as simply the chariot, and the intellect as the very charioteer, and the mind as simple the reins. And the senses, of course the horses, and then sense object, the paths around them, and yet he who is yoked to this body, this inner Atman, the senses, he is the enjoyer and the ultimate regulator of the senses. So here we see the word yukta is used, and the word yukta is also used in various places in the Veda. Has to do with joining of an ox or a people of a controlled, steady mind. So we may say that this particular way of yoga that is developed in Upanishads either come from the internalization of the practices or the tapas that they did, but the discovery of this inner essence of man that was the support of the fleeting kind of senses and fluctuations one experience. So thus, here we see that, when a mind is ayukta, the senses is out of control and senses do not obey him like wild horses. When a man is yukta, his mind is centered in control, then the senses obey him like horses, and a good chariot would control, charioteer would control the chariot. So it becomes very clear that the control of the senses, or some would say even the nirodha of the senses, is what is crucial to kind of experience this inner development. And later in the Upanishad, we hear about the importance of curbing the speech, mind, and control the kind of mind from within through the help of the self, if one is supposed to gain access to it. And then, we have that kind of famous verse, get real, wake up, and pay attention when you have attained your goals, because a razor's sharp edge is hard to cross. And that path is indeed very difficult to cross. And later in the fourth chapter, we have this famous Parangshika Nivyatana Swayambhu Tasmat Param Pashtati Nataratma, that the fool kind of pursue outward desires and is trapped in the kind of death spread wide. But the wise person of steady intellect, he draws his senses in and is able to stabilize the mind among unstable things. I have, we see here that the internalization of the senses is what is the focus here, and not the kind of gaining of high heaven or gaining punya or merit, but it's the internalization, which is the main practice to experience this inner self. And this is also later reflected in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. I'm running a little bit out of time here, so I will, with the Katha Upanishad, I kind of like to conclude just with this sixth chapter, that in the 11th and 12th verse, when they say that is yoga, when the senses are firmly reined in, tam yogam iti manyante, and a man is then free from all disturbances, and yoga is like the coming into the real, as well as ceasing to be or what is unreal. So it's not understandable by speech, not by mind, not by sight can that be grasped. So how can it be grasped? By acknowledging it, by recognizing that it is. And then by affirming that, finding that anchor and feeling that steady support, it becomes clear that that is real if one is able to see through the unruly senses. This kind of is probably best reflected in the early Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is kind of seemed to be the kind of fountainhead of all later Upanishads that develop, and particularly in the story between Yagnavalkya and Maitreyi, where Maitreyi is confused when it comes to about, how, what is this in the essence of, and Yagnavalkya sums it up and he say, it's just neti. It's not this because it's not graspable, it's impossible to grasp. He's undecaying because he's not subject to decay. And then, yet, Maitreyi is confused. And then she argues, she do not finally understand. But the final teaching of Yagnavalkya said, look, what means may we perceive the perceiver? There I have given you the instructions, Maitreyi. That is all there is to immortality. So how do we become aware of that inmost witness, that steady support that does not change, although everything else is changing? And then later in the Upanishad, we see the kind of focus of kind of drawing the awareness in, letting go of curbing all the desires in one's heart. And then one became fit to explore a different world. And then the knots are cut that kind of bind you to normal and delusional existence. And of course, here there's also reference to the 101 nerves pulling our direction in various ways. There is only one leading to the Amrita that goes up, and it kind of brings about that ultimate realization. And thus the Katha Upanishad concludes, arguing that this kind of inner essence of man is what is immortal, is what is bright, is what is shining, and is the inmost support of man. If we move to the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, that we can certainly assume has influences from Sankhya Yoga and later theistic tendencies, and it's certainly plausible to believe it is a principle of Upanishad, since it is kind of Shankara refers to it, and it is kind of integrated in numerous citations on all the Vedic texts. But some modern scholars like Orbelis, he argues that it's kind of mystical, the Upanishad dealing with the teachings of Rudra. Yeah, I kind of would like to skip a few points here and go directly to the second chapter, where there is a reference to yoga, and here it is kind of, there's a reference once again to how meditation on Savitri. So we see this is kind of the inner link that follows from Veda later to the Upanishad, and is always there as the kind of main practice for gain this greater clarity of mind. And once that is done, and when the body is kind of centered, and when one is mature and steady and ripe, then a practice is being suggested just to keep the body straight, and rein the senses in, and then it's possible to kind of transgress this fearful river of death. And here also they speak about drawing in the senses, and there's reference to pranayama, such as, exhale through one, then inhale through the other one, and keep the body and body and head straight, and sit in a place, free from gravel and sand, and in a kind of composed and steady environment. And then you are fit, you are ready to engage in these yogic practices. Now, many of these practices in modern or in medieval times in India is, of course, guhya, it's secret practices. And here the kind of, they argue that a man who has love for his teacher, who has love for God, and who is of a certain predisposition of mind, he is fit to kind of understand this teaching. It is similar to the Katha Upanishad, that unless the mind is ripe, this cannot this wisdom cannot be gained by mere intellectual speculation or argumentation. Yeah, kind of, it's interesting. I would like, the aim of yogic practices is, of course, to rid oneself of avidya, this ignorance that runs deep. And the whole purpose of the Veda is, of course, to bring about knowledge, Veda. But due to the archaic practices and references and the problems of the samhitas and the mystical kind of incantation, it is very difficult to know what these practices actually were. But here, they argue when the mind is ripe and kind of when the kind of disturbing element have kind of fallen off, then one is fit and then one can engage in these practices. And in this kind of noteworthy once again in the chat, the second chapter, to see how reference to yoga is argue that it's with meditation on Savitri. It's the Savitri practice again and again that is supposed to stimulate that inner effulgence, that awakening from within. And it seemed to be the most secret practice of yoga that is there. And of course, here in the second chapter, we also see the same as reference to in Hatha Yoga. Here they argue, when earth, water, fire, and the earth have, when the element is kind of controlled and the body is tempered by this fire of yoga, there is a kind of immortality, a strength, and there is a lightness, a health, an absence of greed, and a bright complexion and a pleasant voice. And that's is the kind of first progress of yoga. And the end of second chapter of Hatha Yoga Pradipika, I believe it's 272, then it is the famous passage, Vapukushatvam Vadane Prasannata Nadasputatvam Nayane Sunirmale, that kind of the body becomes light, the face becomes bright, there's a conquering of the senses, and there is the sign of the Hatha Yoga Lakshanam is the kind of this pleasant radiance of the face. But okay, later in third chapter, we have direct kind of references to Rudra as the chieftain of the gods, and who's equated with Ishvara, and also witnessed the birth of Hiranyagarbha. What is higher than even Brahman is then this Mahapurusha, seated in the heart of men, and he is the one to be contemplated for the ultimate release of suffering. And here, kind of coming to know that which is beyond darkness and to pass beyond death is a kind of coming to know that inmost person or luminous essence, that hidden magical principle residing in all, which the very support, the foundation of everything that exists, and which is everywhere. And in the fourth chapter, kind of we encounter kind of an interesting compound of Shakti Yoga, implying that this inherent power of God creates and dissolves this universe according to the cycles of creation, and according to the Vedas with the kind of various yugas. Certain things is constant. The principle of the self never changes. The principle of Brahman does not change, but the world as we see it and perceive it always subject to change. So here we can read, who alone himself without color due to his Shakti Yoga create countless colors, and in whom the universe comes together, and the beginning and the souls in the end, may he furnish us with lucid intelligence. So we see there is a kind of a tendency for this devotional aspect to kind of take charge, to take seat in the practitioner. And then later we have the famous passage where, you know, two birds who are companions and friends, they nestle on the very same tree. One of them eats a tasty fig, the other not eating, he looks on. And stuck on that very same tree, one person grieves, deluded by her who is not the Lord. But when he sees the other, the control Lord and the Lord Majesty, his grief disappears. And we can, of course, say that, you know, in a nutshell, this distinction is the heart of yoga and Vedanta, to discriminate between what is constant, i.e. not changing, and what is always changing, i.e. all thoughts, ideas, and perception. And on a personal level, according to the text, the person is set free from bondage when they no longer generate karma due to selfish behavior out of likes and dislikes. And on universal level, the world is constantly moving, yet something remains infinitely the same. And this is impossible to verify, explain, or point out, because if this is part of everything, it is always there. So to try to explain Brahman is impossible. But according to the text, and what is here interesting is the very power that reveals Brahman is Maya. And the very power, our kind of tool for understanding yoga, is Prakriti. Okay, so of course, you know, here, if I continue, we have, you know, they say meters, sacrifices, religious observances, the past, the future, and what the Vedas proclaim. From that, this illusionist, Brahma, creates this world, and another remains confined by this illusionary power of Maya. So one should recognize this Maya as Prakriti, it says, and the illusionist, i.e. the great Lord, as Brahman. And this whole living world is just pervaded by things that are parts of him. Of course, there are hefty arguments in Vedanta about the concept of Maya, and we will not get into that here, but there is a glory associated with that oneness, which is incomparable. And although they say he's not graspable by sight, hearing, or understanding, it's hidden in the hearts of men, and insight becomes accessible to the one who can experience and understand this internalized. Okay, and in the 5th chapter, of course, we have reference to Vidya and Avidya, and how subtle this teaching is. I will not get into that here because I'm seeing I'm running out of time, but it's easy, you know, the problem of classical yoga is, of course, this Samyoga between Purusha and Prakriti, and how do we break this Samyoga? And here in the 12th verse, we kind of we can see how this is kind of is hinted to, that the embodied self assume numerous physical appearances, both large and small, in according to its inherent qualities. Okay, now this union, Samyoga, with, you'd say, the gunas of Prakriti, give rise to the perception of duality due to the qualities, action of the body, and the subtle qualities of guna. And so we may ask, why does ignorance exist? Is our normal mode of perception ultimately not real? And of course, this question cannot be answered with our normal operative modus operandi of phenomenology, because if we are swimming in ignorance and covered in ignorance, we need a different support than this changing ignorance to become aware of it. And that is what these seers and sages articulated with the practices of yoga and Vedanta, to point to a different experience, which is constant at all times and exists in everything. And for the one who recognizes it, his kind of heart is open, his mind becomes luminous, and he sees reality as it is. Okay. I think, I think I should, I'll jump a little bit to the end now on the 6th chapter. And the way, the ultimate purpose, of course, of yoga, and I would argue Vedanta, is not to make us into something that we are not, but rather help us reveal suffering. And the ultimate result of that has to be experienced within the individual. As far as the texts say, they speak of a higher bliss that was to be gained from the senses, a bliss that is lasting, eternal, and give the highest joy. And thus they say, that inner controller of the many who remains inactive, who makes the single seed manifold, the wise perceive him as abiding within themselves, and they alone, not others, enjoy eternal happiness. So how do we come to perceive this final kind of essence of yoga, of Vedanta, of Veda within ourselves when we are ruled by the mind and senses? And that very practice, of course, has to be tested within our own awareness. If it makes us genuinely more joyful, steady, appreciate life, and see the divinity of life existing in everything, perhaps then we are on the right path. And the method, at least according to Sankhya and yoga, is to kind of see these our mental disposition, to understand the fluctuating, changing states of our consciousness, but that ultimately learn to recognize that steadiness, that inmost perceiver and giver of illumination, intellect and understanding that is steady and is the center of everything that exists. And thus, I would like to conclude with a verse that says, the changeless among the changing, the intelligent among intelligent beings, the one who dispenses desires among the many. When a man knows that cause, which is to be comprehended through the application of Sankhya Yoga, as God, as Brahman, as Ishvara, whatever we interpret it to be, he's free from all fetters. And there the sun does not shine, nor the moon and the stars. The lightning does not shine. Of this common fire do we speak? But him alone shines. Do all things reflect? This whole world radiates with his light. And of course, there's much to say further about the development of the later Upanishadic tradition, the Yoga Upanishad, but I would argue that the Yoga Upanishad is of a much later development and probably maybe 300 to 400, 500 years old, whereas these Upanishads that are referred to now is probably at least 2000 years old. So that was my brief contribution. My kind of suggestion is that as we see the kind of internalization of Savitri, that is the kind of the hidden link, that is kind of the very first cause to bring about this internalization of this kind of glorious fire that is being mentioned in the Vedas. And if yoga developed out of ascetic tradition, or if it developed in the Vedic tradition, I'm certain that the practice of Sandhya Vandana or Savitri or various forms for japa was crucial in that development of the mind and the greater understanding of the self lying hidden within all. I can't hear any of you now, unfortunately.
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, it was wonderful. And, yeah, first let us take the questions. If any audience having the question, then we can have some discussion maybe.
Yes, please.
Yeah, audience, if you have any questions, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you and we'll allow you to ask the question. Is there any question?
Yeah, namaste. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So namaste, Alexander. It was a very nice presentation. My question, first of all, I should appreciate the altar behind you, which we can see in your camera. So it is related to that. You know, in Hatha Yoga Pradipika, there is always a discussion about Chitta Shuddhi and the role of Nitya Karmas. Your last comment was about Sandhya Vandanam and Savitri. So in your experience, how critical was that role of doing a daily puja, so to say, in your terms? Of course, in India, there is the Sandhya rituals. Everybody has Nitya Karma, Dinacharya. So from a Hatha Yoga practitioner, would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah.
Namaste.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, there is not much reference to Nitya Karmas in Hatha Yoga Pradipika. There's, of course, Hatasya Pratamangatvat Asanam Purva Muchate. It's kind of, Hatha is the kind of first limb that is being mentioned. And there's very little reference to kind of Sandhya Vandana and these practices. Although they say that the final goal of Hatha Yoga is, of course, to merge with Vishnu and to become one with divinity. But when it comes to my personal practices, I would argue that although I have gone very deep in Hatha Yoga, I've studied with Pattabhi Jois for 10 years. I learned the first 4 series of Ashtanga Yoga, which is very advanced gymnastics. The essence of controlling the mind, I would say I gain much more from japa practice and the internalizations of this, daily nitya karmas and sandhya vandana, which were more helpful to bring about that steadiness, because you cannot find the ultimate kind of steadiness of yoga just in a form itself. Like you cannot understand the essence of Vedanta in just pointing out to the word or doctrine or dogma itself. But there is, for me personally, the daily practice of japa and using meditational practices to kind of center the mind was an extremely helpful tool to kind of internalize my perspective and develop my limited mental and physical faculties. And I would argue that much of the strength that I have today, although it's 10 years since I really studied any serious Sanskrit, the support that I find is certainly from the japa and the sandhya vandana that I do. That is the very foundation of my yoga.
Great, thank you.
Any more questions? Okay. So nowadays, yoga is becoming very popular. Everybody wants to become a yoga teachers. And according to you, so how yoga is moving? Means, is it really yoga or it's in the name of yoga?
Everything is doing lip service to the name of yoga. There is very little yoga But that is the nature of the world. People live and swim in ignorance. So the greater, there's to find a real yogi is very difficult. To find those of a internalized, steady, clear, focused mind who is not getting caught up in the kind of modern yoga pornography, I would call it, is very difficult to find. Yet the kind of modern obsession with asana is simply due to the element of yoga within those asanas. And those kind of hidden principles of learning to center the breath, learning to draw the mind more inwards is so helpful for the development of any person. So I think there's been a starvation in the West due to the fall of religion here, that people needed practices. They needed to connect with something within them that felt good, that was meaningful, that was beyond kind of name, fame, and all the trappings that worldly life get us caught up into. And yoga has been a very crucial part of the kind of redevelopment of Western society, of finding that way back in. Now, the question is, how far are we interested to take our practices? Some people are more than happy just kind of shaping the body and being fit, slim, and flexible. That is the goal. That is the end all to their practices. But yet, my experience is that there's a lot of sincere Western seekers, because they come to know and they come to experience something unexplainable and something real and something steady from within. And the very basic yoga asanas and pranayama practices is very helpful to kind of bring about some, chitta shuddhi, if you like. And for those who are interested, he needs to study philosophy. He needs to, go deeper in the practice. But although yoga is very popular now in the West, and a lot of Westerners are going to India to teach yoga, everybody knows that the heart and teachings of yoga is universal, but there's no doubt where the origins came from. And whether it was within the Vedas or outside of the Vedas is hard to say. But the internalized practice of understanding the mind is nowhere articulated as clearly as in the Vedic tradition.
It's wonderful. So we are having one more session after this. Definitely your session was wonderful for us, and it was giving your experience, and it was showing your knowledge, and we got a lot from your session. Thank you very much.
It was a joy to be part of this and to help you. And it was, although I had to dust off and dig deep in my mind to kind of bring up some old jewels of wisdom, it was a great honor to help and be part of this. And I'm sorry about the technical problems in the beginning, but thank you very much, Vigneshwara. Thank you very much, Amrita University. I wish you a very nice end to your program, and I hope the people who participated got some good experiences out of it.
Okay. That was truly a feast of knowledge, sir. Thank you abundantly for your time and information shared. Thank you, Dr. Vigneshwara Bhatt, for I would also like to express my gratitude who are part of this program today, all the speakers. Do stay tuned. The valedictory function is scheduled to begin shortly. I would like to call upon Dr. Ramya Prasad to take over now. Okay. Please stay tuned. We'll let you know when we session. 15 minutes. We'll be back in about 15 minutes. Thank you.
Vedas. We've heard of it. Some of us have learnt it also. For the common man, probably the daily prayers he chants is the closest he has come to the Vedas. But do you know that we are already following Vedic practices? For example, when we feed the poor, when we perform charity, when we share food with others, these are all Vedic practices. So the 3-day international workshop that is currently underway at Amrita University Mysuru Campus is aimed at encouraging us, the common people, to understand Vedas as a practice, as an academic subject with immense potential, and as a pure tradition that has remained undiluted, even after hundreds and thousands of years of its existence. Today we bring to you the highlights of day 1. The morning was very auspicious. We had our inaugural function with the traditional lighting of lamps along with Vedic chants. This was followed by the welcome address by Dr. Rekha Bhatt, Principal of Amrita University, Mysuru Campus.
Om Bhadrang Karnebhih Shrunuyama Devaah.
It's with deep regards and sincere gratitude I cordially welcome all the distinguished speakers and ritualistic performers who have gladly joined us in this unique endeavor that we have.
The focus of the first day was Rig Veda. The chief guest of today's function was Professor K.E. Devanathan, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Karnataka Sanskrit University, Bangalore. Professor Devanathan comes with a vast knowledge and insight into the Vedas. When he joined us online, he addressed the audience and described something very beautiful about the Vedas. He said that, okay, Vedas is a reflection of common practices which have great benefits for all of us.
Youngs, I request my youngsters, not only you are required to protect us, unearth the hidden things of Vedas. Vedas are only the reflection of common practice, I have already told.
One of the main highlights of today's program was the full demonstration of Pavamana Homa and its significance. As described in the name, Pavamana Homa is a ritual that is prescribed in the 9th mandala of Rig Veda. In essence, it is a purifying ritual that removes all the negative effects from one's previous births, as well as all the sins that we may have committed knowingly or unknowingly in this birth. The Homa lasted for about 2 hours. About 610 mantras were chanted and sesame seeds or til that we know in Hindi were used as the offering over here.
Abhamana pradhanajyaho vinayogah Om esha devo amartyah parnaviri vadiyati abhidronanyasadam swaha.
Though it lasted for 2 hours, most of them were present online witnessing the entire proceedings. This was very evident in the lively question answer sessions that followed soon after.
How do we make sure that we are entirely focused on the chanting when we may not have Sanskrit knowledge?
So it is clearly mentioned that Guru Mukhena Vidya. When it comes to the Vedic knowledge, we have to have the teacher who can guide us. For example, we might learn swimming by reading the book and all. Maybe 10,000 pages talks about the swimming. After that, reading the book will be not able to jump into the water. There should be the instructor.
We also had a session on Rigvedic recitation by Vidwan Manjunatha, who is a gold medalist from Karnataka Sanskrit University, Bangalore. There was chanting along with the full explanation about the nuances of the chanting in the practiced in the Vedas.
Brahaspatim sarvaganam swastaye swastaya adityaso bhavantu naha.
The second half of the day was lined up with two expert talks. The first session was with Professor Dharani Dharan from the Department of Sanskrit, Pondicherry University. And the high point of his speech that he made his entire speech in Sanskrit, which was a completely unique experience for everybody who was present over here.
Apaurushayam iti prathamataha asmabhihi avagantavyam. Apaurushayam iti. Nama etate na purushakritam iti. Arthat, it has no any creator.
The last speaker of the day was Dr. C.M. Neelakanthan, a former professor from the Sri Shankaracharya University, Kaladi in Kerala. Giving a very unique insight into the academic interests of Vedas, he described that the whole world is currently looking towards Vedas.
The importance of Vedic tradition in its content also. What we call the form and content. Swarupataha pradhanyam, arthataha pradhanyam. Swarupataha pradhanyam in its oral tradition, form. Arthataha pradhanyam in its content aspect.
Thus ended today's session. About 400 participants from India and abroad were present online throughout the day. So much knowledge shared in one day. We promise to come back with much more. Until then, it's Om Namah Shivaya.
Sri Mata Amritanandamayi Devi, affectionately known as Amma, dedicates literally every day of her life to consoling suffering people all over the world. Her message and the essence of her compassion is expressed in her darshan, the motherly embrace she has given to more than 33 million people throughout her life. She has been known to give darshan for more than 22 hours without interruption. When people pour out their hearts to Amma, she offers them emotional solace, spiritual guidance, and concrete solutions to their problems. Receiving Amma's embrace, many feel inspired to offer selfless service to those in need. In this way, this simple yet powerful act has become both catalyst and symbol for a growing international network of humanitarian initiatives known collectively as Embracing the World.
Not so long ago, there was a little girl in a village in India. Each morning, her parents sent her to walk through the village, collecting vegetable peels for the family cows to eat. She visited more than 30 houses each day. In some houses, she saw that everyone was healthy and had enough to eat. But in the very next house, the people would be hungry and their jars empty. In the next house, someone was suffering from a serious disease and could not even afford a painkiller, let alone real medical treatment. In the next, someone was too old to take care of herself, with no one to look after her. Seeing all this little girl got angry at the world and angry at God. She got so angry about all the inequality and suffering in the world that she felt like hurling herself into a fire. But then she thought to herself, my death is not going to help anyone. People will continue to suffer, just as they always have. And then she thought, if it is one person's destiny to suffer, isn't it our responsibility to help them? With this simple yet profound conviction, that each of us has a responsibility to lend a helping hand to those less fortunate, this little girl moved forward with confidence in her life of service and compassionate care for all beings. She was just 9 years old, and people started calling her Amma, Mother. Embracing the World is a global network of regional humanitarian organizations inspired by the India-based humanitarian initiatives of the Mata Amritanandamayi Mat. Embracing the World exists to help alleviate the burden of the world's poor through helping to meet each of their 5 basic needs: food, shelter, education, healthcare, and livelihood, wherever and whenever possible. We are especially focused on helping to meet these needs in the aftermath of major disasters.
Our volunteers have provided immediate aid and long-term rehabilitation for survivors of the Gujarat earthquake in 2001, the Kashmir earthquake in 2005, the Mumbai floods in 2005, and Cyclone Isla in West Bengal in 2009. In the United States, after Hurricane Katrina, Embracing the World donated $1 million to the Bush-Clinton Katrina Fund in aid to help the survivors.
Augmenting these efforts, we work in the fields of environmental conservation and sustainability to help protect the future of our fragile planet. Through Amrita University, our researchers are innovating new means of delivery of goods, knowledge, information, energy, and healthcare to enable us to help those in need here and now, wherever they are. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami was the most devastating tsunami in recorded history, claiming nearly 228,000 lives. In India, an estimated 18,000 people lost their lives, and nearly 650,000 people were displaced by the disaster. After the tsunami struck, Amma's ashram became the center of the relief operations, despite the fact that the ashram is badly damaged by the floodwaters. Hundreds of volunteers provided free, immediate, and temporary relief.
It's very striking because I've been involved with the United Nations, with non-governmental organizations, and first it's very difficult to get good delivery. Quality delivery of services to those in need, to those in distress, to those who support, to whom we're giving support, and to do it in a timely way is exceedingly difficult, especially in the middle of a massive disaster, massive emergency like the tsunami.
Amma visited some of the worst hit areas in Tamil Nadu, where more than 8,000 people were killed, and personally consoled each person who came to meet her. Amma's volunteers distributed more than 185 tons of rice and other provisions over the next several months, as well as 6 million meals to tsunami survivors.
With most of the labour and services provided free of charge by thousands of volunteers from all over the world, the actual value of relief provided was even greater than that reflected by the expenditure.
Embracing the World was the first non-governmental organisation to complete permanent housing for tsunami survivors in India. And by October 2008, had completed all 6,296 pledged homes.
International NGOs, UN agencies have something to learn from the work of Amma and what she has been able to build. How much of the resources mobilized to support those in need go to those who are providing support, the personnel, whether UN agencies or NGOs? The overheads tend to be quite high. How much of the money which is mobilized actually goes and benefits directly those in need? This is remarkable, very striking for me, how she managed to get that formula right.
The 2011 Tohoku earthquake was the fifth most powerful earthquake in recorded history and triggered a devastating tsunami with 40-meter waves. Nearly 16,000 people lost their lives, and almost 130,000 buildings were completely destroyed. Within 3 days of the disaster, Embracing the World sent its first group of volunteers to the affected areas to assess the situation on the ground and to distribute food and water for the refugees. Later that same year, during Amma's visit to Japan, she announced a $1 million donation to help pay for the education of children who had been orphaned by the disaster in the prefecture of Miyagi. Amma then made an unscheduled stop in one of the tsunami-affected areas of northern Japan. Amma visited one of the relief centers for refugees, where she embraced and consoled each resident, offering them her shoulder to cry on. Knowing that the residents had lost everything, Amma presented household items for their material support and to help improve their life at the center. Amma traveled through the worst-hit areas of Shichigahama coastal region to get a clearer understanding of the magnitude of the destruction. Upon reaching the beach area, Amma led her tour group to the water's edge to pay their respects to those who had lost their lives. The offered flowers were carried out to sea, along with everyone's prayer for peace.
In June 2013, a multi-day cloudburst over the North Indian state of Uttarakhand caused devastating floods and landslides in the country's worst natural disaster since the 2004 tsunami. According to the figures provided by the Uttarakhand government, more than 5,700 people were presumed dead, and almost 100,000 pilgrims and tourists were trapped in the valleys. Doctors, nurses, technicians, and other Embracing the World volunteers, along with the telemedicine unit and ambulance, made an arduous 4-day journey from the south of India to the flood-ravaged regions of northern Uttarakhand. From July 1st to July 20th, Embracing the World volunteers provided free medical consultations and medicine to approximately 8,000 people in the disaster-struck area. This was carried out in the base camp in Agasthyamuni, as well as a number of other villages. Through its 500 million rupee relief and rehabilitation package, Embracing the World will build approximately 500 houses, the sum total of all the homes destroyed by the flood, in 42 selected villages in the districts of Rudraprayag and Uttarkashi. These homes will be built on common sites provided by the Uttarakhand state government. In 2013, Embracing the World announced a $2 million relief package for the massive destruction caused by Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines. On Amma's third visit to Kenya in 2011, she was welcomed by the Vice President of the Republic of Kenya, His Excellency Kalonzo Musyoka. Amma was there to officially inaugurate Amrita Watoto Boma, a care home for more than 50 children. Spread across 11 acres on the banks of the Athi River, Amrita Watoto Boma provides shelter, food, education, and healthcare in a loving environment, managed and run by Embracing the World volunteers. Facilities include dormitories, classrooms, a playground, sports facilities, and a medical clinic. The children come from across Kenya, identified with the help of the Kenyan government's children's officers, as well as social workers, village chiefs from poor slums, and references from local church pastors. Over the course of 2 years, in a project funded in part by the United Nations Democracy Fund, Amrita University's Ammachi Labs empowered more than 3,000 women with its unique blend of computerized vocational training and life enrichment education. The women have had a remarkable success, earning a combined total of over 1 million rupees in product sales. Through this integrated curriculum, Ammachi Labs graduates are not just employable women, but are also committed to playing a greater role in a democratic process and giving back to their community.
Ammachi Lab is the most creative way of empowering women of all of the projects which the UN funds around the world. This is the one dearest to our heart. It's the one we're most proud of, and it's the one that we intend to take to the rest of the world so that they can learn from what you have achieved. Congratulations to Ammachi Lab, to the university, and to all of you.
In 2014, Amma participated in Stanford University's Conversations on Compassion series. She answered questions posed by neurosurgeon Dr. James Doty, the founder and director of the university's Center for Compassion and Altruism Research and Education.
Compassion is the most important factor in our lives. It is the first step. If we take this step courageously, without fear, then all of our decisions and subsequent actions and their results will have a special beauty, spontaneity, and power. Human calculations may be wrong, but actions born of true compassion can never be wrong.
Mass infinite love and compassion.
The university is assessed and re-accredited by NAC with A grade and is globally ranked #1 Indian private university under BRICS nation as per QS and Time.
At the lotus feet of Namah Shivaya. Greetings to one and all, and a very warm welcome to this valedictory function of the 3-day international workshop on the ideology inherent in the tradition of Vedic recitation and practices and exposure, jointly organized by the South Zone Cultural Center, Thanjavur, Ministry of Culture, Government of India, and Amrita Darshanam, the International Center for Spiritual Studies, Amrita Vidyapeetham, Mysuru Campus. I invite Dr. Vigneshwar Bhatt, convener of this international workshop, to lead us in.
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Tam Agnivarnam Tapasa Jvalantim Vairotani Karma Phalesu Stham Tam Devi Karna Devi Sativadi Agini Imam Vidyapati Yamrashayasprage Vedanta Rachasabani Yajogumshe Sahishri Ramrita Satam Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om.
Welcome to the dignitaries on the dais, Brahmachari Ji, the director of Amrita Mysuru Campus, Brahmachari Muktidamrita Chaitanya Ji, the correspondent of Mysore Campus, Dr. Rekha Bhatt, principal of Amrita Mysuru Campus, and our guest for the occasion, Professor Srinivasa Varakedi, Vice Chancellor, Kavikulaguru Kalidasa Sanskrit University, Ramtek, Nagpur, who will be joining us shortly. May I invite Ms. Mukta Sen, Assistant Professor, Department of Languages, Amrita Mysuru, to present a brief report on the various sessions and events conducted as part of this international workshop.
The Chief Guest, Professor Srinivasa Varakedi, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Kavikulaguru Kalidasa University, Nagpur, and all the respected people on stage and dear participants online and even offline. I feel proud to present a brief account of this 3-day international workshop. The idea of this 3-day international virtual workshop germinated with a motive of giving an academic platform to traditional Indian culture, theology, and philosophy through the Department of Amrita Darshanam in alliance with the South Zone Cultural Center, Thanjavur, Ministry of Culture, Government of India. The program was inaugurated by Professor K.E. Devanathan, Vice Chancellor, Karnataka Sanskrit University on 25th February 2021 on the premises of Amrita Mysuru. On this occasion, welcoming the gathering, Dr. Rekha Bhatt, Principal Amrita Mysuru, said that the Vedas, if comprehended and practiced appropriately, will help us in ensuring the world peace. In the inaugural address, Professor K.E. Devanathan said that the Vedas are relevant and useful even to the present day as they are available in the candid form when compared to the epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata, which are available in different versions. He also reiterated on the point that people should practice rituals as much as possible to lead a happy life. Later, we had Pavamana ritual, Vedic Recitation, and practical session prior performed by Dr. Vamshikrishna Ganapati and his team, which was screened, during which systematic chanting of Rigveda was presented by Vidwan Manjunath M., followed by question and answer session, which was moderated by Dr. Vigneshwar Bhatt. Next, we had Professor K.E. Dharanidharan from Pondicherry University addressing the gathering on the topic, the ideology inherent in the tradition of Rig Veda. In his talk, he said that Vedas are anonymous. It is believed to have delivered by the Brahman. Thus, Vedic traditions have significant wisdom for life to be meticulously followed by people in this day-to-day life too. Next, we had the speaker, Dr. C.M. Neelakandan, former Professor, Shankaracharya University, Kaladi, on the topic relevance and importance of Vedic studies in the modern time. During his talk, Professor Neelakandan said that the whole world is looking at the Vedas now. A lot of research works are being conducted. Hence, Indian tradition is on the limelight in the whole world. On the first day, around 1,250 participants were present on various platforms. On the day 2, that was 26 February 2021, to begin with, we had Mr. Vigneshwar Bhatt, the convener of the workshop, giving a glimpse on Indian scriptures after he rendered Vedic chanting, followed by Rudra Yaga performed by Dr. Vigneshwar Bhatt and his team. Post lunch on the same day, Dr. Vamshikrishna Ganapati and his team was present. He spoke on overview of Yajurvedic recitation and Shrauta Yaga, during which he explained the significance of Shrauta Yaga in leading a happy and contented life. Then we had Dr. Chakravarti Ramachandran speaking on Vedic analytical theory as per Mimamsa, wherein he explained how Vedas could be analyzed by Mimamsa philosophy. Day 3, that is today, we began with Dr. Santosh Bagoji More speaking on influence of the Vedas on various culture, during which he highlighted the fact that the wisdom inherent in the Vedas are the base in all the cultures, tradition, and religion of the world. Next, we had Darshesti Yaga screened, which was prior performed by Dr. Narasimha Bhatt and his team. We witnessed the Darshesti Yaga with minute details given by Dr. Narasimha Bhatt, Assistant Professor, SMS College, Umachki. Later, we had Professor Manjunath Shrauti and Professor Subramanya Bhatt, who opined that Samaveda sets some standards of music from which the music around the world derive. Post-lunch, we had Mr. Alexander Medin, Director of Nozen Yoga Center and Back in the Ring project, who gave a talk on yogic wisdom enshrined in the Vedas and Upanishads, wherein he threw light on how yoga wisdom is rooted in the Vedas and the Upanishads. He gave a lot of references from Upanishads to establish his idea. Thereby, we concluded all the sessions of the workshop. This 3-day international workshop on the ideology inherent in the tradition of Vedic recitation and practice and exposure has proved a very enriching one in terms of knowledge sharing and bringing together of many scholars in Indian tradition and philosophy. I conclude that it was a very fruitful one. Thank you.
The guest will be joining us shortly. Today, we have amidst us Professor Srinivasa Varakedi, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Kavi Kulaguru Kalidasa Sanskrit University, Ramtek, Nagpur. He has held several administrative positions such as the Professor and Dean, Faculty of Languages, Karnataka Sanskrit University, Registrar at the Karnataka Sanskrit University, Bangalore, Director of the Postgraduate Studies and Research, Karnataka Sanskrit University, Director of Sanskrit Academy, Adarsha Shodha Sansthan, funded by the Rashtriya Sanskrit Sansthan, Ministry of Human Resource Development, Government of India. His areas of specializations are Navya Nyaya Philosophy, the School of Indian Logic, Shabda Shodha Sanskrit, Computational Linguistics and Semantics, Knowledge Representation Scheme of the First Order Predicate, Calculus developed by Frege, Conceptual Graphs of SOVA, Boolean Algebra, and Western Symbolic Logic. Dvaita Vedanta, one of the 3 schools of Vedantas, Indian philosophy, Sanskrit literature, grammar, and pedagogy. Some of his special interests include, and he's also actively involved in, the discourses of Shastrartha Joshi, philosophical discussions, participation in e-list, participation of e-content, preparation of web contents for learning, computer languages and Linux, teaching classical text traditionally, writing of articles for public interest. He has authored and edited several books, book chapters, and has written a number of articles. He has won several awards and honors. A few to name are the Maharishi Bhadrayan Vyasa Samman, conferred by the President of India for the contribution to the interdisciplinary field involving Sanskrit, the Chinmayananda Gold Medal Award, Shri Krishna Anugraha Prashasti, Pandit Honor Award, Vijayendra Puraskar Award, Vidya Manya Prashasti, Shastra Varidhi Award, and so on. It will definitely be a pleasure to listen to you, sir. Sir, could you please address the gathering?
Sarvebhyah pranamaha. I'm happy to be part of this great international conference organized by Amrita Darshanam International Center for Spiritual Studies, Amrita Vidyapeetham, Mysuru. I'm happy to be part of this valedictory function. I'm extremely sorry for joining late. Because of my travel conditions, I could not reach my destination in time. I was in loss of connectivity, therefore I could not join you in time. But somehow, God's grace, I could manage to join all of you. Thank you very much for invitation. Great gathering has assembled here. Honorable Director Brahmachari Shri Anantananda Chaitanya Ji, Brahmachari Muktidamrita Chaitanya Ji, and Principal of this center, Dr. Rekha Bhatt, convener of the program, Dr. Vigneshwar Bhatt, who is a very well-known Mimamsaka, and the audience sitting across the country and abroad. So nowadays we are living in new norms of COVID pandemic situation has taught us a new lifestyle. The Vedic sages always informed us how to get the learning from the Guru with a relation of Antevasi and Acharya relation. We had forgotten. We came out of that Gurukula system. We entered into modern education system where students are enrolled in the colleges and universities. Teachers are employed in the same institution and they don't have any direct connection. Amrita Vidyapeetham is a new age Gurukula system where I have visited long back the Kollam center and also Coimbatore center. Even often I visited the Bangalore center, Bangalore campus of Amrita Vidyapeetham. I am happy to inform you that my experience was different. My experience was that it is a modern age Gurukula which offers experiential learning with experience. It is not just a learning by providing information. So this university in its vicinity has developed many centers. Today, through the Center of Spiritual Studies, this international conference is being organized. 3 days conference has seen many scholars presenting new ideas. Why these new ideas? Old ideas in new form. Today we are in a new sort of Acharya Antevasi relationship. Today I am sitting in somewhere in between Chandrapur and Nagpur, and I am so Antevasi to you. So I am already through internet, and I am sitting next to you, and you are sitting next to me. We are communicating. This new age communication has created a new kind of Antevasi relation so that we can reach out to the entire world. So with this, we have started communicating. I congratulate the organizers for organizing this international congregation on Vedic Recitation and its future plannings through this webinar mode. Coming to the theme of the conference, my submission is this. great seers and great thinkers and great Vedic scholars have come and delivered lectures. My focus would be towards future, because India is placed in the past, be it Vedic tradition, be it our Puranic tradition, be it our Itihasa tradition. Entire Indian knowledge tradition is placed in the past, and it is the matter of study of the past. That means this entire knowledge tradition is not considered in the contemporary knowledge area. This is really danger. And we are studying our own tradition as part of history. History is dead. No one is interested in history. If history can create the future, that's where we have interest. There are two possibilities. As COVID situation came, the entire world has stopped. And the entire world started looking at the traditional, so-called traditional rituals and the practices and the knowledge traditions to get the inspiration, to get the new solutions for the situation that is prevailing in the world's universal situation. Now, people are looking at back. I call upon them, look forward. If you look at forward, you can see only Vedic tradition. You can see our ancient Indian knowledge tradition, and the entire world can place their past civilizations in the future. I am sure the new education policy, as it focused on Indian knowledge traditions, our own roots, our next generation is going to be very fortunate than our generation, because they are going to get all the benefits, all the knowledge lore which was not available to our previous and our generation. Somehow, I personally, like Vigneshwara and many others, we got this, the best of the both. We got the best of our ancient Indian tradition, Shastric knowledge, Vedic knowledge, and we have got good introduction to the modern knowledge, contemporary knowledge traditions. Now, our effort should be how to not to revive. If somebody tells me that let us revive the Vedic tradition, and I would say, no, Vedic tradition has never been lost. It is there. You need not revive it. You should be aware of it, because when we see the Vedic tradition is lost and we have to preserve it, all our efforts for preservation will force us to take some action to preserve it in a museum, record it. So whenever people come to me with a project, let us record Vedic recitations. Why? Because in future it will not be available. He is the last person to recite the Vedic tradition. In each Veda Shakha, the situation is same. I'm not saying that situation is very great. One of the Sama Veda Shakha, which is available in Rajasthan, right now the third generation, only person is available with half knowledge. That means when the person dies, along with him, a Shakha is dying. A Vedic Shakha is dying. And how to revive it? Don't record it. Don't use modern gadgets to record the Vedic recitation and keep it saved in the archive. And when the Vedic rituals are not in practice, don't make a mock of it and record it and preserve in the archives, and don't create a Vedic museum. My request to all of you, my call all of you, let us come out of this preservation mode. What to do then? We should have a mission mode project, not to revive, but to enjoy the benefit of Vedic recitation. It should come to our life. If you want to make the Vedic Shakha alive, then you yourself give the time. I should go to Rajasthan and stay with him and should learn the recitation and then come back. If at all we want to revive the tradition, my request to all of you is at least spare one of your family members or spare some time and go to the gurus, learn the recitation and pass it on to next generation. Recording is not the solution. My friends, today we are talking about preservation. Let us talk mission mode project for that getting the benefit of Vedic tradition. How to do that? In the Arthashastra, Kautilya's Arthashastra, in the beginning of Arthashastra, he says there are four faculties. There are four faculties of Vidyasthanas. He would say Trai, Anvikshiki, Trai, Varta, Danitischeti. Anvikshiki is the faculty of logic, where you should get the skills of analysis, skill of argumentation, and skill of analyzing the inputs that you get from the various sources. The second, which is very core faculty of education, is Trai. That means Vedic learning, Vedic knowledge tradition, and Varta. Varta is of course commerce, and then Dandaniti, which is of course political science or administrative sciences. Now, considering this, the Trai is scientific community. That means our Vedic tradition was always considered to be faculty of science. Today, we don't have any guts to say that our Vedic tradition is a science. Why? Because we have forgotten it. We kept that in our temple. It should be taken to the labs. This is a change. If we take the Trai faculty to the labs, then we can really revive the situation. Coming back to the Vedic recitation and practices, as I told, if at all we want to revive the tradition, the revival should happen through human chain. That means a human being should give the time instead of recording in the machines. So my request to the institutions to really inspire people to give time for Vedic recitation and continue the tradition. That tradition will revive the entire Veda Shakhas. Yes, our ancient seers, as it was recorded in our system, Mahabhashyakara says, the people used to live for the tradition, not they used to get the living by the tradition, living from the tradition. We are today where the Shakhas are giving life to us. I mean, we are getting the livinghood. We are livelihood is possible through the Veda Shakhas. If at all we want to really get the benefit, real benefit out of Vedic recitation, we should submit our life, and for that we should prepare the mindset of young generation. So loss is loss. During the period of Mahabhashyakara, he says there were 21 Veda Shakhas left. Before, in Puranic tradition, it was 24. 24 became in the time of duration of Mahabhashyakara, Patanjali's time, it was 21. Now we are left with only one. 100 Yajushakhas were there. 1000 Sahasravartma Samavedaha. 1000 various recitation methods. Today we call it the gharana, music gharana. There are seven music gharanas are available today. 1000 music gharanas were available in India. Not only in India. If you see today, just now I had a great conversation with one of my friends who is the director of international relations in Vietnam. And we are going to conduct an international conference on the Sanskrit, the living Sanskrit tradition in Vietnam. He says entire Southeast Asian region has the Vedic tradition. It had the music recitation, music rendering methods. The 1000 ways were available in India. We are now left with 7 or 8. And similarly, Atharva Veda is a lateral entry, but it was a chikitsa paddhati. It was a remedial science. All these things. Let me say that though we are left with a limited resources available now with us, we should not try to revive them. We should not try to preserve them. Don't take it in negative sense. We should really bring them into life. If someone asked me to develop a museum for Vedic instruments, I would oppose it. I would say, instead, you start performing yajnas in daily life, and then those instruments will be alive, will be available in our lifetime. Therefore, why should we create a museum for them? Once you create museum, once you create archive, it will be dead because there is no connection with life. My request to the younger generation, if at all we are interested in our Vedic tradition, if at all we believe that Vedic tradition is our future, then we should adopt that in your life. We should bring that in our life. Only the connection with life can revive or preserve the knowledge traditions. Therefore, with this, my future ideas, I don't get into the discussion of how Vedic traditions were there continued, what is that, and because I'm not a Pandit of Vedic, but one thing I would say, the Vidyasthanas that are enumerated by Madhusudana Saraswati in his work, greatly Vedic traditions were enumerated by him. We need to really look into them and bring them to life, not as a knowledge part of the history, but as part of life. With this, I once again congratulate Amrita Vishwa Vidyapeetham, the Center for Spiritual Studies, and the director and the organizers for holding this conference at right point of time. New education policy is now coming to India, where Vedic tradition should find its place in the mainstream education instead of a parallel education. Therefore, with this aim, we should work. I congratulate you, and I look forward to your activities for future. With the blessings of Amma, I'm sure Vedic tradition will find its due place in the modern education system. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity. Though I'm late, you were waiting for that. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you very much, sir, for those insightful and very inspiring words. Now we invite the participants to share the feedback regarding the conduct of this workshop. We welcome suggestions to explore the scope for the betterment. In fact, a link of the feedback form has been shared through emails and WhatsApp groups. Yet, it will definitely be a pleasure to listen to a couple of you directly. Kindly raise your hand on Microsoft Teams, and our technical team would enable to unmute. We welcome you to share your ideas, opinions, suggestions for the betterment and the scope of further workshop of this kind. In fact, I always wanted to ask a couple of questions, but due to paucity of time, I kept postponing. So I take this opportunity, if I may, Emin, if you may permit me to ask.
Yes. Any question, any suggestion?
Sir, is there an appropriate age for Vedabhyasa? When should a child start learning? What do you think is the right age that a child should start learning Vedas?
Question is, if question is to me, it is well defined, and Dr. Vigneshwara is there. He is the right person to answer. But definitely nowadays, I am advocating that the Vedic tradition has very clearly stated the age of Vedic recitation, to begin the Vedic recitation. That is between 5 to 8. Ashtavarsham Brahmanam Upanihita. Then Ashtavarsha would be very best time to at least 3 years you spend time, and then 3 to 4 years. After Samhita, you can again send to modern education. That would be the great age, and all faculties, mental faculties will be revoked, and it will be a great revolution. I promise you. I promise you that the boy who learns the recitation of Vedic tradition will emerge as a great thinker for future.
Okay, sir. Also, there are myths with regarding to the gender. There has always been a gender bias. Probably they usually say that women should not be reciting Veda. What is your opinion or take on this, sir?
Yeah, it is a great question. And yes, anybody else is answering this question?
Sir, you can answer.
Yes, I have I have conducted a detailed study, very detailed study on this particular aspect. When I consulted my own guru, who comes from a traditional Vedic tradition, he said there was an interruption in the tradition. All are equal in Vedic recitation, because in Vedic recitation we find many mantras are to be recited only by ladies. Then you can't avoid them. Even in Vedic rituals, they are part of it. Therefore, there is no nishedha or rejection or the prohibition for ladies to recite Vedic tradition. But there was an interruption for the ladies to continuously, because due to the nation's condition, time has changed. We were not in a situation to send the ladies outside the home for education. But we have a great history in Nalanda. When I visited Nalanda also, I am told that there was one place where ladies used to stay, and they used to recite Vedic tradition. Therefore, there's no prohibition at all. But time has come again. We can revive the tradition, and that tradition should continue. Ladies can definitely have all right to recite Vedic mantras.
Sir, add to this, today morning we were having the session with Agnihotri Narsim Bhatt. So we were having the same discussion about this. So he clearly mentioned being the traditional practitioner. So his wife is also following the Agnihotra and Darsheshti and all. There is the ritual called Patni Sanyaja, which comes in the Darsheshti. So it should be there. There are the mantras. It should be Patnim Vachayati. So he has to make her chant the mantras and all. So that's why in previous time also we were having the opportunity to learn. And one more thing, in the Aranyaka, it is mentioned Apakramata Garbhinyaha. So some mantras are not good to chant because of their physical condition. So when they are having the garbha and all, during that time, if they chant, that might affect in the negative way. So that's why some mantras might be prohibited, but not entire Veda. That's how he says. And one more thing, now we don't know what mantras are prohibited for them. That's why maybe after some time we got a lot of attacks on our tradition maybe. That's why during that time we lost that. What are the mantras can be chanted by women, what cannot be. So again, if we do the research, maybe we can give the opportunity and we can make the proper syllabus for them. That's how I think.
Thank you, sir. Participants, a gentle reminder to all of you, the feedback form has been shared through email and WhatsApp groups. Kindly ensure to fill and send it back at the earliest possible. We would definitely like to learn the feedback about this particular workshop. May I now request Brahmachari Anantananda Chaitanya ji, the director of Amrita Mysuru Campus, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Om Amriteshwari Namaha. Om Vedashastra Puranedihasa Shashwata Bandhave Namaha. Om Vedashastra Puranedihasa Shashwata Bandhave Namaha. My humble pranams at the lotus feet of Amma, Mata Amritanandamayi Devi, the Chancellor of Amrita Vidyapeetham. Sambhujya Swamiji, Amrita Swarupanandapuri, the President of the University, and most respected senior sannyasi disciples of Amma. Dr. Venkatrangan, Vice Chancellor of Amrita Vidyapeetham, and all deans and directors of Amrita campuses, and most respected, valuable scholars and guests and participants. I really felt this international workshop was awesome, and the kind of knowledge that has been shared, like a small child, I am watching this. I felt by virtue of the position only, I am thanking you all. This event is considered as a milestone in the history of Amrita Vidyapeetham Mysuru Campus. It is the first occasion ventured by Amrita Mysuru Campus to uplift and give a platform in an academic forum to explain and showcase the practices of various Vedic traditions and meanings involved in it. It may be one of the unique events in India in which Vedic traditions and practices are shown together. That is, the theory is explained and practicals are also shown together. World is now recognizing the importance of yoga and its practice, which actually derived from Vedas. In India, people perform various rituals like Ganapati Havana, Mrityunjaya Havana, etc. without having the knowledge from where it is derived. These rituals are part of Tantra and Smarta practices in which names and forms of deities are defined. For instance, Ganapati with one form and Lord Shiva with another form. But such kind of practices are not there in Vedas, even though there are Vedic deities. In Vedas, all deities are considered as various forms of energies. Amrita respects tradition as well as it gives equal importance to modern scientific knowledge, one complementing other. Ethics and values in the society can be restored only when tradition is respected and explained properly to youngsters. In fact, it is also a science which has to be realized by world now. I, on the behalf of Amrita Vidyapeetham Mysuru Campus, take this opportunity to extend a very hearty vote of thanks to Dr. Vamshi Krishna Ganapati, who performed Pavamana Homa. Thank you, sir. I would like to take this opportunity to thank Dr. Vigneshwar Bhatt and his team who performed Yudra Yajna, which has become one of the core event of the workshop. Thank you, sir. I must mention my deep sense of appreciation to Agnihotri Dr. Narasimha Bhatt, who presented Darsheshti, which is one of the important event of the workshop. Thank you, sir. I extend my thanks to Mr. Sabapati, representing South Zone Cultural Center, Thanjavur. I'm extremely thankful to Vice Chancellors, to Professor K.E. Devanathan and Professor Srinivas Varkedi, Karnataka Sanskrit University and Kavikula Guru Kalidasa Sanskrit University, respectively. I take this opportunity to extend most sincere thanks to eminent scholars K.E. Dharanidharan, Professor C.N. Neelakandan, Dr. Chakravarti Ramachandran for their support and cooperation. We are thankful to Dr. Santosh Bagoji More, Director of Samatvam Foundation, United States, and Alexander Medin, Director of Northern Yoga Retreat Center, Norway, for their support and valuable guidance. I must again mention my deep sense of appreciation to Dr. Vigneshwar Bhatt and Srikanta Perida, whose exemplary work and dedication has made this event possible. I also express my gratitude to the print and electronic media for the wide coverage of the event. I'm really thankful to all volunteers, all ICTS and visual media team members, especially Suraj and team, for their willingness and involvement to take on the completion of work. Last but most important one, the participants. I am extremely thankful to you. Without you, the event itself is not possible. Thank you very much. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Amriteshwari Namah.
For any stage, I mean, there cannot be a stage without an audience. So thank you very much for being such a fantastic set of participants. Thank you very much for your kind listening and active participation throughout this 3-day international workshop. Thank you very much for making it really a grand success. Curtains drop down. Curtains drop down. As we come to a close of this 3-day international workshop, till we meet again sometime closer in yet another occasion shortly. Shall we all observe the Shanti Mantra now?
Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु लोकाः समस्ताः सुखिनो भवन्तु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ श्री गुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ॐ